It's interesting because I think something that we run into on our show a lot is, talking to people where they just are, they say, well, I just don't see how a conspiracy or whatever. That's such a loaded term from so many reasons.
Yeah.
But how could so many people be involved in something, right? Like that is what is like a bridge too far for people to understand. This is something that we've done episodes about 9/11 and stuff. This is something I'm really thinking about where people think that something, it's too troubling to think about because the sheer amount of people that would have to be involved when it's like, I think that that's the wrong approach to understanding how a lot of these things work, where so many of the kind of inflection points are based on things like social pressures and really like more discrete sort of kind of power balance stuff that it's very easy to kind of influence people in that way, right? But also, I think it kind of like, I don't know. I think that it's just like not an accurate way of kind of like looking at how these things actually work in the real world. And I think that there's this idea that these things have to be this one way, which is this like red string map where it all kind of like pieces together perfectly and everyone's involved. And once that whole thing, like once you unmask that whole thing, the whole thing will crumble, as opposed to kind of a very like nebulous and kind of shifting set of relationships and social and like social bonds that are, and like career, influencers and different brokers that make different things happen. And it's just, it doesn't fit this idea that people have been told of how like the quote unquote conspiracy works. I think your book on Franklin does such a good job of kind of like, kind of ripping that open a bit.
Well, I mean, you can go back to the Kennedy assassination, and you've got Oswald, who knew Jack Ruby, and Oswald, who knew David Ferry.
George the Bornchild, yeah.
And they all knew each other. I mean, I don't even think that they knew what was going to happen after November 1963. So, and our media has gone to work on debunking that Oswald knew Jack Ruby when there's a lot of evidence. And our media has also said that Jack Ruby was just this marginal character, even though he was actually running guns to Cuba and was totally plugged into the Chicago mob. They were the ones that were overseeing him in Dallas. And De Morgenstern, I mean, there are these nexuses that are there.
Yeah.
And that's one thing about the Franklin scandal is if you look at the Franklin scandal, there's a lot of players. You've got some players from Iran-Contra. Mm-hmm. You've got some players from Watergate. But they didn't come together in a room and say, okay, we're going to do this. They were just doing their regular malevolent things that they do to their fellow humans. And then all of a sudden, their interests intersect, and that's how it works. That's how I believe it works.
That's actually a really kind of good way to put it. I mean, there's for those of you who've out there who've read The Mighty Wurlitzer, it's by Hugh Wilford. It's a book about essentially CIA front organizations during the Cold War, and I think there's a temptation there to be like, well, every single person involved in these organizations knew that they were working for the CIA. And like, all of not only from the leadership, but from the membership too. And that's not how it works a lot of the time. A lot of the time there will be, obviously, I mean, especially in the case of the organizations written about in that book, there are people who work directly for the CIA. But there's also a lot of people whose interests coalesce with that, right? And these people kind of come together and these networks form that are both organic and man-made at the same time. I mean, they're all man-made, but you know what I mean? Like organic and kind of artificial at the same time.
Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein.